Does anybody have one of those friends that just seems to kind of know everything about everything and can do everything? Well, this is my friend. This is that one guy that you're playing a trivia game and he knows every question, and he can dress for whoever he's hanging out with and talk to a brick wall. Just the most approachable guy I know, Connor Folger. Welcome to the show.
What's up? Thanks for having me, man.
Also, fun fact, you were the person who designed the logo for this. So if y'all like it, give him credit. If you don't, blame him. I think it's pretty cool though.
Let's go. Shameless plug. Shameless plug.
Yeah, I've never had to, design a logo or anything, and you're the creative one. So I was like, what should I do? And you're like, maybe hold up a coffee cup and kind of the wake up and lead thing. So that I thought it was a good idea.
Hey, mugs are coming soon, everybody. Mugs soon.
Yes, mugs are coming soon. I met Connor a couple of years ago at church here in Birmingham. He lives in Atlanta now, but we became very good friends. We're in a community group. Our wives were good friends, and now he lives in Atlanta. We keep up. Don't see him as much as I want to, but one of the better friends I have that I don't see regularly. So super thankful for him, and he's just got a really cool story that I want him to share with you today, and we'll park the bus along the way. But I know you're from Dothan. If you want to talk anything about the best city in Alabama, you can. But I know you got to Auburn, and from what I can tell, just did really all the things. So if you want to tell me a little bit about your experience there, would love to hear it.
Yeah. Like you said, grew up in Dothan, Alabama my whole life. Graduated with a high school class of about 50 folks. So super small town. Um, Ended up deciding to go to Auburn University to study engineering there. Auburn is obviously not a school of 50 people. It's got a lot of people, but I was blessed through my parents' personalities to have a very large personality myself. So my natural inclination is to just like go, just to get in the midst of everything and everybody, learn as much as I can, meet as many people as I can, be as involved in as many things as I can be in. Usually all at the same time, half the time to my own detriment. So, like you said, I got to Auburn as a freshman and jumped into being in a fraternity. Obviously, studying a little bit less than I probably should have for the degree that I was trying to get, but learning all on the way. Ended up starting to date my now wife as a freshman at Auburn, which is really cool, as well as meeting most of the friends that not only were in our wedding, but continue to be friends to this day. So my experience at Auburn was unbelievable. It's what I think is the best place on earth, to be honest with you, the best school on earth for sure. I got to do a bunch of pretty cool things there, from serving in a group at the school to being in a startup with my best friend to leading campus ministries to doing a little bit of everything in between all those things. So it was really fun.
Yeah, man. I know you did a lot of those things, and I think I've shared on here before with me being at Sanford. There's so many things to do, and I know early on for me, if I was really honest about my intentions, a lot of it was just probably trying to get certain titles and have approval from other people, and so that people thought I was valuable or cool or whatever it was. And I know we have somewhat similar stories in that on the back end of college, we were much more serious about pursuing a relationship with God, which doesn't mean we're perfect, but I think that affected the way that we viewed the world and why we actually did things. But what were some of the things? I know you mentioned them, but with IFC and fraternity and Plainsmen, like tell me about was that something that you did early on in college, or was it later on that you got that stuff?
Yeah. So it's funny you asked that. So really on the front end of things, when I first came into college, along with most freshmen, I would say, like, main focus is getting in a fraternity and just trying to survive freshman year to get to your first summer is how I would pretty much describe my freshman year. I was involved with some random stuff freshman year that was kind of small. It was more just service organizations and that sort of stuff, kind of trying to dip my toes in the water of what it meant to be in some of those groups. Auburn has a million different serve groups and different teams and stuff that you can be a part of. And so you're really just trying to navigate the waters and find what your lane could be really that freshman year. So going more into sophomore year, I think probably the two biggest things that I began to get involved in was an organization in Auburn called Auburn for Water, which they serve to essentially um, serve the people of this earth that don't have clean water. And it'd be a shocking statistic to know how many of those people there are in this world, even in 2023. And this was back in 2019. And so our goal was essentially raise as much money as we can, bring as much awareness to the fact that those people are without water, not only in our own state, but also all around the globe. All the meanwhile sharing the gospel with them, and then also getting extremely plugged in with our home church in Auburn, Auburn Community Church, which we had the pleasure of meeting at in Birmingham, which was awesome, at a satellite campus there. So those two things, along with my fraternity side of things, really started to swallow up a lot of that college experience. I was involved in all three of those things, even through the end of college, in a pretty substantial matter. And so kind of moving on from that, you mentioned getting into the Plainsman side of things. So we have this group at Auburn. It's called the Warrior Girls and Plainsmen, and essentially we're just student ambassadors for the university. If you've ever seen an Auburn game on TV, we're the weird guys that wear the orange jackets on the side of the field. And so it was an unbelievable honor to get to be a part of that group. It's 13 guys, 13 girls that just get to serve the university in all sorts of different events. It's not just football games, but it really is a service group that is geared towards serving both the student body population as well as some of the people that run that university, and have a lot of influence in our state. And so I actually did that my junior year going into my senior year. It kind of has an overlap between years from a serve period perspective. And then during that same time, I was also the chaplain of IFC at Auburn. So Interfraternity Council, it's just like a council of all the fraternities that are on the campus, that meets once every other week. And so I essentially was there to steward the chaplains of all the different fraternities on campus, and give them any and every resource that I could to help them in the journey of trying to lead their guys in their respective fraternity and in their faith. And so all that going on, I had to throw one more thing into the mix because that wasn't already enough on my plate. And so happened to jump in with my best friend, who happened to be the best man at my wedding too. And we decided to start a startup because we didn't have enough on our plate. And so we started running the startup with some of our close friends, all while this other stuff was going on, which is another story that we'll probably get to a little bit later. So all the while getting to date my lovely now wife, and build some pretty incredible relationships.
I would say, so what I normally say to college students, if I'm talking to them, which I don't want to come across as rude, but I normally say, you think you're busy, but you're not that busy. Like, because I think a lot of them, and when I say them, this was me a few years ago, but you're hanging out with friends, you're sleeping in late, you're watching Netflix. Connor Folger, I don't know if you were doing any of that between Plainsman, IFC Chaplain, startup. I mean, you were doing a lot of awesome things, and I want to talk about each of those, but maybe rewind a little bit, because I know that obviously your faith and starting to take that more seriously impacted a lot of different things. I if I had to guess, you might not have been involved with some of these things without what happened in your life. I know you and Marcy's relationship took a change. So walk us through some of that before we jump into I guess the big three that you just shared with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So early on, like I said, met Marcy, my wife, our freshman year at Auburn, literally like 3-4 months into school. Pretty crazy. Provision from the Lord there, because who knows what would have happened if it would have been any longer than that. And yeah, so we got to meet freshman year. Both of us were, as many freshmen are, just extremely immature and just trying to figure out what in the world we're supposed to do, because we kind of feel like adults now as 19-year-olds, And what that turned into was a relationship that on the surface was awesome. I mean, we had so much fun together, had amazing friends, had a lot of amazing memories that we made together. But kind of behind the curtain of things internally was extremely toxic, whether it was just from uh, uh, selfishness, pride inside of that relationship, physical sin within it, which I know a lot of college students struggle with, especially those that are trying to pursue a faith with Christ. And so, essentially, struggled with that all through freshman year before finally, kind of at the end of that year, going into sophomore year. That first summer of college, both of us actually went to different cities, and I actually went to the beach down in Destin and did beach chairs because that was always a dream of mine to do for a summer. And so I did that for a summer. Marcy went and stayed with her family in Birmingham, which is where she's from, for that summer. So, which was really like the first time that we'd ever had apart from one another since we started dating, outside of like Christmas break. And so during that summer, I think the Lord opened my eyes a lot to see. He almost sobered me up to realize what we were doing that he had not called us to. Whether it was from a purity perspective, how I should be leading her, how we both should be setting ourselves and our lives apart from the world as examples for Christ. And so I think that essentially over the course of that 3 month stint, he was able to sober me to a point where when we got back to school and it almost was, let's go back to the way things were 3 months ago, there was almost this wake up call of, hey, actually, we don't need to do that. We really need to change this up a lot, like night and day difference. And thankfully, we both had some amazing people that we had surrounded ourselves with through our church body that we were a part of in Auburn that challenged us in that were like, hey guys, y'all need to change this up. Like this is not right how things are going right now. And we know that you both are capable of more. And I'll never forget, one of my best friends told me whenever we were having that conversation, naturally, I was kind of pushing back a little bit. He told me, you know, I think what Jesus is telling you is he's not telling you you're wrong necessarily, but as much as he's telling you there's a better way if you want it. And
Mm.
so what we had to do was humble ourselves enough to a point to say yes to that. And, Jesus is never going to make you choose him. Like that's not how love works. And so he wants you to make that of your own volition. And so, essentially over the course of the first 2 weeks of sophomore year, it was almost a pruning period where we both looked at each other and we were like, yeah, there's some change that needs to happen here. And so what that resulted in was we actually broke up from like the second week of sophomore year all the way, like essentially the whole first semester of our sophomore year of college at Auburn. Um, and the Lord did probably one of the most incredible miracles over that 6 month period of just refining our hearts, bringing us back to Him, showing us what a relationship with Him actually looks like, what it meant like to walk with Him each and every day, actually read our Bibles, actually pray every day, actually be in community groups and serve in a church, and actually like walk out what Scripture says, rather than just taking in this, I don't know, this Bible Belt Christianity that we'd had growing up in high school. And it totally changed our lives. And so over the course of that time, we made some of our best friends that held us accountable during that time, continued to push us, continued to challenge us, continued to encourage us in that path. And then ultimately what that led to was in January of, I guess it'd be 2020, or no, not 2020, 2018. We kind of had a conversation. We were like, we'd been around each other somewhat, just because of mutual friends or whatever over the course of that 6 months, even though we had kept our distance for the large part of things. Um, but I had seen the Lord do the same work in her as He'd done in me. And so the question started to become like, okay, I absolutely still have feelings for you, and you absolutely still have feelings for me. So should we try this again and see if it's different? And I'll never forget the very first time, like we had that conversation. We took Christmas break, didn't speak to one another for about 3-4 weeks or something like that. Knew we weren't going to see each other for sure because we lived 4 hours away from one another. Came back to school and we're like, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's just see where it leads, see how we feel, go from there. So we had a conversation over dinner one night, and I was like, hey, look, I think we should try this again, And she was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. She's like, no, I don't feel that way. I don't feel any peace about it. I think it would be a bad idea. And then naturally, like any guy would do, I'm like, yeah, oh, yeah, for sure. Me too. And so, anyways, we go our separate ways. And I remember leaving that conversation that night, and probably over the next like 48 hours, remembering a phrase that a friend of mine had told me over breakfast about a month prior, like just before winter break. This friend of mine, he served in our church, had been a missionary in our church for about 10 years, or had been in the mission field for about 10 years and was a part of our church. And I remember asking him, like, hey, what, like, if you had to nail down, like, something that the Lord has taught you over those 10 years of being in the mission field, like, what would it be? And he said, probably the number one thing that the Lord's taught me was the path of the Lord is not always easy, but it's always clear. And that really stuck with me. And so when we got out of that conversation that January, I remember waking up the next day and this feeling persisted through the next 48 hours or so, where I continue to think to myself, like, I have less clarity now than I did before we had that conversation. And this doesn't make any sense to me. And this phrase is like fresh on my mind. So I seek counsel with some older folks in our church, with our pastor. And he's like, wow, like, yeah, I mean, that definitely doesn't sound like you went in the right direction. And I'm like, well, she said no, so I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here. And come to find out, we had both had some friends from both sides of the table kind of saying, like, hey, we want to tell you no to this just to protect yourself because of how far you've come. We don't want to see you backslide. We don't want to see people start to question y'all's newfound faith in Christ and what that could mean from a witness side of things to our community that we'd built. And we essentially just had to get to a point where we just said, you know, we've got to trust the Lord in this. And so in those conversations with some of that wise counsel, one of the women in our church had told me, you know, Connor, I think you're acting in this situation more out of fear of what could happen than faith in what the Lord could use it for. And that was really almost like the permission slip that we needed to try it again. And so I crawled right back to Marcy and I said, look, hey, this is all the stuff that's been happening in the last 2 days. And this is where I feel like the Lord's leading us. And I feel like it's towards a new relationship that's totally separate from the old one that we had. And I think we can do this together with the friends that we've built, with the community that we have, with like Jesus beside us, the Holy Spirit within us. And we were like, we're going to try it. And so we sent it and tried it out. And now, I mean, 5 years later, some odd years later, we're married. So it's kind of crazy.
You're married. It's sealed now. She can't get out now. Man, that's an amazing story. And for those of us listening, I know we may not all be in college. A lot of you aren't, but imagine being a sophomore in college, being plugged into a local church, having not just friends, community around you, but older men, older women that you have almost given like spiritual authority to over your life, to really look into your life and speak into it. And that's what you two did. And that's uncommon. And I think the reason we don't do that is because we're afraid that we're not going to get our way. I can speak to that because that was my story. I mean, me and Erica broke up in college, and I knew what I was supposed to do when we broke up. I knew that the best thing to do would be really surrender that relationship to God and be like, hey, I really want this, but I know it's way more important for us to get aligned with you first. Before we ever, get back together, and maybe you make it clear that we don't. And thankful for how God like led us to do that. But it's really scary to really walk open-handed in something like that when you feel like you really care about somebody, but just love that story of how you invited other people into your life. And I think if we have a strong community of people around us, it's pretty hard to drift too far because you have people that are watching over you and caring for you. And so, amazing story of just how y'all are together now. So, great, man. Well, I love that. And I know everything wasn't perfect after then. And you weren't just a perfect person. Your life was super easy, but I know that was definitely a new chapter for you, both in your relationship, but then probably also, the way that you spent your time, which, I mean, I know you started getting involved with Plainsman and being the chaplain and this startup. So let's kind of jump into that whole world. I mean, I cannot imagine how much work you had going on then. What was that all that? What was all that about?
Yeah, so it was essentially a period of trying to kill myself because of how much I had on my plate. I'm kidding, but yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. I grew up in a family that both my parents are entrepreneurs, or go getters. They're like, you got to send it on everything that you do, just try it all, and then see what sticks, kind of thing. And pretty much the two positions, like between IFC chaplain and plainsman, were two positions that I'd seen since being a freshman that I was like, man, I would love to do that one day. Like, that's something that I really want to be a part of. And so seeing that on the horizon, it was almost like, all right, now's the last chance to kind of get involved with that, you know? And so the Lord opened both of those doors. And then in the midst, it was almost like when it rains, it pours, because I applied for chaplain first, got that. Well, actually, rewind just a little bit. My best friend asked me to join the startup with him. So that happens first. I'm working while being a full time student in engineering, like with that going on. And then I apply for this chaplain position, get it, even though I was like, there's no chance that I get it. Like, there's so many other guys that I think I could think of that would be killer in that position. And then I do the same thing with Plainsman. I just like threw my name in the hat, figured I'd interview for it, and it just so happened that that door gets open too. So it was almost like a perfect storm of too much good, you know? I mean, it was kind of scary at first, and I remember there absolutely being periods of time, because when there was a point in time where all of those things as well as school overlapped for about 8 months, like all at the same time. And meanwhile, I'm trying to maintain this new relationship that we've created with one another, trying to love and serve her, while trying to go to church. Like, there's just a million things going on. And I was absolutely too busy for what I had capacity for. And it ultimately started leading to like a level of burnout, to be honest with you. Like, there was a point in time during that period where I remember going to Marcy, or going to people in our church, or going to my friends in the church, or in my friend group, and being like, guys, like, it feels like I can't breathe because of how much stuff I've got going on. Like, I have not a spare moment in the day where I can just like actually just rest. And it was very interesting to see. I'd like never dealt with that before in my life. I'd never dealt with anxiety before in my life, but this was like as close to, if not in it, as I had ever been, and have been since then, to be honest with you. And so I think that was one of the biggest lessons that I pulled out of that season of life, was just like, you don't have to do everything, nor is it good to do everything. And so being more selective with my opportunity of what do I have capacity to do, to where when I'm doing it, I do it to the full measure of what my capacity is. You know, like, not just doing everything in a halfway manner, but doing a few things really, 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 really well. And that was a really humbling experience that, not to get too far ahead, but ultimately the Lord interrupted in and of himself with COVID, which was insane. So we can talk about that a little bit more later, but yeah, it was absolutely wild to get to do all those. I'm unbelievably thankful for them. I think that the Lord showed me more about myself, more about how to handle a situation like that than I've ever gotten closer to in my life. All the while getting to put me in some pretty incredible places with incredible people.
Yeah. Um, I mean, you were doing so much, and I think it's easy to just say yes to everything, especially when it's somebody like you that's really outgoing and likes people and is a high achiever. But there's kind of that cliche line that people often say of, you got to get really good at saying no to certain things, because everything you say no to is yes to something else, but everything you say yes to is no to something else. And maybe at the time for you, it was you saying yes to Plainsman was saying no to more time with Marcy or in your church, or whatever. And that was all part of your story. And I know you learned a ton from each of those, but I feel like you described uh, Plainsman and IFC, and you can talk about those if you want, but I want to hear about this startup experience. I mean, most people don't do something like that in college, and I feel like that was the beginning of a lot of new things for you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's crazy to think about now. Just to let everybody know, I'm not working for said startup anymore. Said startup does not exist anymore. So it was more a lesson learned than a success story. I'll say that. But yeah, essentially, one of my best friends came to me in, I guess it was towards the beginning of my junior year, and was like, "Hey, I've got this idea, and I want you to be a part of it." And it was probably one of the coolest ideas that I'd ever heard of, where we essentially wanted to build a software platform that gave churches anything and everything that they could need to do what they do, not only on Sundays but every other day of the week, and in their communities and with their congregation. But not only that, we wanted to connect churches to other churches all around the world. And this was essentially going to be a one stop shop for all of that stuff. Um, and so that was something that I was extremely passionate, given the other things that I was being involved in throughout college, my involvement in our church, and just seeing how there, especially in the South, like there's a church on every street corner, but half the time, neither of the pastors know each other from
Mm.
street to street. And that like broke my heart, because it's the church, it's not a church. And so I was extremely passionate about it. And I think what was so interesting to me was whenever he came to me and asked me to join this effort, he was like, "Yeah, I want you to be our creative lead." And I was like, What does that mean?" Because in my mind, I love the fashion industry. I love design. I love sneakers. Like I love graphics, lettering, like you name it. I love it. That's always been something that has caught my attention. I like to joke about the fact that, honestly, in the past, I probably should have been either a product designer or an architect or something like that, because the design side of my brain is just like probably far larger than the engineering side of my brain. Um, but that allowed me essentially a vessel to start to explore that and figure out, like, hey, what has the Lord gifted me in this side of things that I can now contribute not only to this team but also to this mission of connecting these people and connecting the church. And so that started a pretty crazy journey for me, where I got to learn how to do graphic design, got to learn how to do marketing, got to learn how to do videography and editing and copywriting and all sorts of different stuff, that essentially I just kind of became our utility guy. Of if we needed something that was kind of out of the ordinary done, Connor can probably figure it out. And so that went anywhere from doing that stuff to helping design our website to doing merchandise and all that sort of stuff. And what it's turned into is now a pretty large side hobby of mine, which has been running a side graphic design agency called Air Studios for the last probably 2.5 years, where we do pretty much every type of media. So it's still very much alive and well, and that was kind of the seed that sowed it. And yeah, it was an unbelievable experience.
Mm. I think so often in life we go into things and we don't know, why we're doing them or what we're going to learn from them. And even though the startup didn't quite work out, I know you learned so much from that. I'm sure about business and you are. If I had to pick a utility guy, you're the guy. It's like Folger can figure it out.
Yeah.
But Air Studios, I know that's been a ton of fun, and I definitely want to talk about your job at Brassfield and Gorey. But like design. I mean, that's amazing. I think it's super interesting that you're in like construction now. By the way, for those of you that don't know who Brassfield and Gorey is, like one of the better companies around. But you work there, but then on the side you're doing a lot of design stuff using that creative brain, which I feel like those probably aren't super similar. Like I assume there's not a lot of people doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you said, I'm a project manager for Brassfield and Gorey, and yeah, we build buildings, and that has absolutely nothing to do with graphic design, which is pretty funny. So like I said, come from an engineering background, so I'm kind of more on the operations side of being on a job site, making sure the job runs smoothly and efficiently and under budget and on time and all that fun stuff. But really, what I feel like the startup experience gave me as far as tools going into that position outside of just like learning engineering at school was learning how to work with people, because we had a team that was so all over the place, diverse, all different ages, all different ethnicities, from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different birthplaces, a lot of different passions, and it's learning how to bring all those together to maximize the potential of that group. And I feel like that's really what I pulled the most from that in what I currently do. But and on top of that, learning how to really um, expand my knowledge and my experience with creativity and design and art and just creating things in general, um, really started there. And what it turned into was Air Studios, which was this kind of brainchild of mine where, I now just learned how to do all this stuff. The startup started to go in a direction that was less than desirable. And so I was kind of left there sitting, asking the question, like, what do I do with this? And so, like I mentioned earlier, right as kind of the startup was waning out, COVID was starting. And so now you have this perfect storm of, I'm asked to leave school because everything's closing down in March of 2020. I go home until I start working, which wouldn't start until August. So I have about a 6, 7 month stint of just what do I do with my days, just like everyone else did during COVID. And I was at a point where I had to pay some bills off from school. And I was like, I got to make some money. I'm trying to propose to this girl that I've been dating for the past 4 years. Like, I'm trying to get that ball rolling. So like, I got to make some money. And so the best way to do that during COVID was remote work. And it was amazing to see the Lord's provision there, because essentially what was happening was all these people that hadn't had the time because of their full-time jobs to think about these passion projects that they've had for years and years and years now had the capacity to do it. Not only that, but you have stimulus checks coming in that they can pay for it with. And so I started getting like phone calls off the hook, emails all the time. Hey, I've got this idea. Hey, can you make this logo? Hey, I heard you did this. Can we try this out? Could you help us with this? Because everyone was on a screen, because that was the only way anybody could talk to one another. And so that really kicked off that journey of actually putting what I had learned to use in a totally different manner, where now I was actually running stuff as an actual like design agency, where I'm making branding packages for people and websites and graphics for ads and that sort of stuff that people at until that point had not had the chance to do. And it's funny because now it's very different from what I do from a 9 to 5 perspective. However, I think the two kind of act on one another in bringing out the best parts of both, because in construction everyone's usually pretty straight laced and straightforward, and it's kind of hard to look at things from a different perspective. And I feel like in design, some people are so fluid that it's hard to get design systems to work, because everyone's just like, oh, I just kind of feel like making it this way. And so I feel like I've been able to take those attributes from both of those different fields and kind of play off of them and making me better in both instances. So,
Man, that is awesome right there. And I love how they're opposites, but you're learning from each of them. And if there's one thing I've learned from you sharing that story and from some of the mentors from afar that I have, is if you're in your 20s and really in life, be an aggressive learner. Like, people like to say, learn before you earn. And yes, make money in your 20s, sure. But I think if you can, not I think, I know if you can learn a skill, like, you now have a skill that if your job just gets completely blown away, like, you know how to do something for the rest of your life that most people don't know. And you put in the work to learn it. And you were able to evaluate where some of your natural talents were, and then we're able to see that you enjoyed that. And now you have a skill. And I just think that that's one thing for people listening to this to think about. I think you need to crush it in your job. Like, don't slack in your job by like doing something on the side and learning about it. But like, I just think it's really valuable to be able to learn something new. So
yeah.
props to you for doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, just encouragement. I mean, like you said, like, we're in our 20s. I think I have to remind myself a lot of times, like, I work for a corporate construction company that is amazing, and I love working here. And what I get to do is it's a lot of work, but it's extremely rewarding because of the relationships that I get to have, both with our teams and with other teams that we work with. And I think what I have to remind myself of is I'm 25 years old. You
Yeah.
know, like I'm 25 years old. Like there's mistakes that can be made, but there's also like we can learn so much at this age, like in your 20s. And like it's okay if you just want to go for it every now and then, and I think that instance specifically, like ultimately whenever I was starting to work on that startup, like that was my exit strategy. It was like, that's what I'm going to do. Like full time when I graduate school, this is what I'm doing. And I kind of put all my marbles in it and it went a different direction. Like it didn't pan out. And that was totally okay. And I attribute a lot of that to the Lord's provision of just like his faithfulness in opening this door for what I do full time now. But just like you said, I mean, like send it on trying to learn something new. Like I think right now, a lot of people in their 20s probably look at that and they're like, well, I just like show me how to make the money and like in like a 5-minute video or a TikTok and like I'll just figure it out, I'll just do it from there. But I feel like the struggle is like whenever I first started learning how to do design, whenever I first started learning how to run a construction job, it took me a year to do both of those. Like it took me a year to learn how to do graphic design. I'm still learning how to do graphic design. I've been doing it for 4 years now. I'm still learning how to run a construction job and build a building, and I've been doing this for 3 years now. So you've got to understand like there's a process and you've got to understand the time of that process and know that just because it may not be going as fast as you want it to or as aggressive as you want it to doesn't mean it's not working. Doesn't mean you're not growing. Doesn't mean you're not learning. And there's beauty in that. There's beauty in learning over time and understanding you kind of have to get bit a couple times before you really get to step up. So
Mic drop. I am all about that. I think I like to view, this is what I've been saying recently, but view your 20s as an internship for the rest of your life. You're 25. You can do whatever you want when you're 30, 35, 40, 45. Like, and I think so often people get so obsessed with like making the fastest dollar. And if you can make good money in your 20s, great, do it. But I think the more that you can learn, the more skills that you can develop, the more valuable you'll be. Therefore, you can do more of what you want the older that you get. And I think another big part of being early on in your career in your 20s is just setting direction. Like you may not know exactly what you want to do with your life. Like a lot of people are trying to figure out, what do I want to do? But as long as you feel like you're moving in a direction, like if you can look 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead and you like the idea of where you feel like it's going, just double down on it, because you said it took you a year to learn how to design. It took you a year to learn how to build a building, and you're still learning along the way. And we all want immediate gratification, and that's easy. And anything easy doesn't really lead to anything worth having. Like it comes on the back end of hard.
sure.
So love the grit that you've had. Another thing I want to talk about as we're nearing the end here is you're just so approachable. I think because of your personality, but also you're into like fashion and sneakers and that. But you also, for those of you who can't see Connor, he's wearing a golf shirt right now, so like he can kind of fit in with everybody. What kind of doors has that opened up for you just to meet all kinds of different people, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's pretty incredible just to see. I don't know. I feel like the Lord has kind of blessed me with a personality that I feel pretty comfortable everywhere. Like I just know who I am, and so that means that I can be who I am in any setting, regardless of who's around me. It's just that who I am from an outward perspective, maybe in what I'm wearing or how I'm talking to people, might look more like a chameleon, which is kind of interesting. So I think from a personality perspective, I always joke that I could have a great conversation with a brick wall because I just think it would be interesting. And I kind of take that to people too. Like I think every single person on this planet has such an incredible story that I want to learn about. And if being or looking a certain way gets me further into that conversation or makes them more comfortable to open up to me, like I'd love to do it. So I think because of the two different things that I do with most of my time now between the design world and the construction corporate world, I get to kind of play on both sides of the street. Where yeah, like I'll wear Jordans on Saturdays, and then I'm wearing boots the other 5 days of the week or 6 days of the week, and golf polos or t-shirts and hoodies. I mean, it's kind of funny, but what it has done is it's opened not only myself up to see where other people are coming from, but also I think it's opened doors for them to accept me and to let me in to a conversation that actually means something. And it's not just like table talk.
Mm,
And that's something that I continue to have to push myself out of my comfort zone on. And I think it's kind of funny because if you'd ask my wife, she'd be like, yeah, Connor will talk to anybody. But there's still circumstances where, okay, I'm a little nervous to talk to this guy or this girl. Like I can tell that we are not the same person. But just throwing yourself into those situations and seeing where they go, like the old Michael Scott saying, like,
mhm.
sometimes you just got to start a sentence and I don't really know where it's going to go, but I'll figure it out. Like, that's kind of where I take most of my talking from. It's like, we're just going to see where it goes. And you'd be surprised at the gold that's on the other end of that journey.
Mm. Totally agree with you there. And I've learned a lot from you. And one more thing that came to mind that's in line with what you're talking about is I think it's becoming more and more rare for people our age, teenagers, definitely early 20s, mid 20s. It's becoming rare for people to be able to talk to adults. It's like because we've been ambushed by technology and we're texting each other. It's a lot of people are not comfortable talking to adults, but those are the people that are going to be hiring you, listener. And one thing I've seen about you, Connor, is you walk up to 50-year-old men that are very successful and just strike up a conversation with them. And sure, part of that is natural giftings just based on your wirings, but that's probably why you have the job you do right now and why you got the opportunities you did at Auburn, because you are willing to meet people and network. And it's all about who you know, right? So, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to share about that, but I've always admired that about you.
Yeah, for sure. I think I appreciate that. And I think one of the most interesting things about what I do now, like as a young guy in the construction world, like construction is not necessarily like a young man's game. I mean, most of the guys that we're talking to on a job site or in our job site trailers or in meetings are guys that have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. Like this is their life. And here I am, this 25-year-old asking like 30, 40, 50-year olds like to do work for me, because I work for a general contractor and we have subcontractors that work for us and we have an owner that we work for. And so it's the same corporate structure of any business. Like you have buyers, you have sellers, you have managers, you have employees, but I feel like the age disparity is a lot farther away in construction specifically. And so I'll never forget the very first time that I tried to lead a meeting with guys from other partners that we were working with on a job. And I was a co-op fresh out of school, probably 22 years old, and leading a meeting. And I think the average age of the attendee was 45. And I'm sitting here asking these guys to do work and help us out and drive their costs down and do it faster and all this stuff. And all the time feeling essentially like a fraud. It's like why are they going to listen to me? And what I learned through that period of time and what I've kind of held to now is that, you know, a lot of people get nervous about having those conversations because they feel like they're not, I don't know, maybe not qualified to have the conversation. Maybe they're afraid that they're going to say something wrong or upset somebody or insult somebody or whatever it may be, or just look like a fool. And what construction taught me in having those conversations is people will take authenticity over information any day of the week.
Mm,
Like, regardless of what people are also going to take you for who you are. And at least the good people will. And the people that you want to work for or that you want to work with or that you want to meet and so into. And so I think getting over the stigma of if I go and talk to this extremely successful gentleman or woman that is a millionaire, billionaire, whatever, like knowing that they know that I don't know everything. Like they understand, they can see it on my face that I'm not the guy that's like the tech startup billionaire 25-year-old, you know? Like I work a normal job and I'm a normal dude. And so I'm going to talk to them like I'm that person. I'm not going to inflate things. And you would be surprised at how receptive people are to that. Because when they know that you're not trying to be fake to them, they're not going to do the same thing back to you.
That's an incredible answer, and you're getting a ton of experience right now. And that's a huge point of this podcast, everybody. As we close out, I mean, it's called Wake Up and Lead. And when I say lead, for the most part, for those of us that are young, I just mean lead yourself. And when I say lead yourself, it's what's the mindset that you have? How do you interact with other people? What's your worldview? What habits do you have? And I hope that you've learned from Connor. I sure have, just about he's not perfect, but he's authentic, just like he shared, and he's learning along the way. And I think the best leaders are always learning something new. And I think that you've shown us that you're always learning. So super encouraged by you. And I got to end this episode like I always do, of getting you to tell everybody to wake up and lead. So I'm going to say it's time for you and me, and you got to say to wake up and lead. You ready?
Yeah.
It's time for you and me
To wake up and lead.
Let's go.